the assessment took place because of timing, and I think that timing was definitely an enabler in itself. The fact that we had colleagues from different agencies, media development organizations, NGO, UN, who were willing to dedicate their time for a week to look at this issue. We had a number of people who were in country, but also World Vision and interviews who were able to come in from the outside. And I think for us, that was definitely a success to be able to bring together such a diverse group. And I think the assessment really benefits from that.
One of my main recommendations will be to actually invest in understanding better the local information ecosystem. In times of crisis, all systems and the structures are completely disrupted. Social fabrics, are fragmented. People are in displacement. Local media are equally affected. The way people used to access information, share, protect, changes. Community leaders disappear. Local radio stations are also affected. How information flows after an emergency, in a post-disaster situation, where people go for information, where people actually resort to figure out how can I get in touch with my families, what is the nearest health facility. Understanding how information flows in a disrupted environment is key for the humanitarian community to be able to fulfill the right that people have to know, ask questions, and participate in their own relief and recovery.
Putting human back into humanity. We talked a lot about that during the assessment. We have a responsibility when we are in the communities talking to whether it's refugees, IDP population, whether it's host community, to provide information. It's brilliant that we're providing food, water, shelter, and other critical, urgent, basic needs, but we also need to provide information when things are coming, who's doing what's happening in the overall context.
I think one of the main finding that came out is how people were completely kept in the dark in terms of what was happening, just in terms of aid provision, in terms of what were the possibilities in terms of shelter, what food was coming even that day. I mean, there was absolutely zero information on what people were having even in camp settings.
Families we talked to in Erbil and Tahuk and Suleimania, they wanted to know what was happening in their point of origin, what was happening back at home to the families and friends that they left behind. So they wanted to know ISIL movements, Peshmerga progress. They just wanted to get that information. They wanted to know what was going to happen to them next, where their next meals coming from, where will they live next. Families were living in unfinished school buildings or unfinished construction sites, and just horrible living conditions, no sanitation facilities, 30 families in one tiny room. So they just really desperately needed to know what was going to happen next, what the international community was going to do, what the plan was. So to me, it's that having that conversation with families to say, this is what we're doing. We might not have everything sorted out. We might not have all the information, but this is what we've got at the moment, and we're providing that information back. And really carrying on that conversation. I think with aid workers, we're compelled to act. We're compelled to do stuff, and I think we need to stop. And while we're doing that, talk and hear and listen to communities.
Every single organization and individual in that particular assessment in Iraq brought a very complementary set of skills, expertise, and experience. And I think that's the beauty of what the CDAC Networks actually brings to the mix, which is a diversity of UN agencies, NGOs, now local organizations in different regions like in Asia, and also very importantly, media development organizations. So we have humanitarians, we have media expertise, we have communication, we have technology providers. I think that's the beauty of what the network brings to the mix.
For us at OSHA, I think the assessment was a success just because we were able to incorporate the findings into what we call the humanitarian programming cycle, such as the humanitarian needs overview, the strategic response plan, which basically dictates what will be the priority for the next little bit for humanitarian agencies as part of the response in Iraq. And so that is definitely a first step and I think the assessment definitely enabled that process.
I think the key concept is predictability, and predictability needs to be built in something that agencies do as part of their standard operating procedures when they prepare, respond, and recover from help communities recover from any sort of a humanitarian disaster or an emergency.
In terms of the challenges of making this happen, again, I don't think there were huge challenges in the end, but there could have been. And I think until the last minute, we weren't sure if this was going to happen. And because of chance and timing and people who really believed in making this assessment happen, up to the last minute decided to commit their time. But there was a period where we weren't sure if this was going to happen, if people had the opportunity and the time and the funding as well to volunteer to come and do this assessment. So we were really dependent on the goodwill of all these agencies, which turned out to be great, but in other circumstances, if people hadn't been available, then we wouldn't have been able to make this happen.
A variety of things that we have recommended. One is obviously agencies to really work into from the very early days, from the very first assessments, to really include questions on access to information and access to communication channels within the standard needs assessments. Historically we have asked people what they need, but not what they need to know, and it's not obviously the same thing. We've been also working as part of the CDAC network with the Needs Assessment Task Force in Geneva, with ACAPS, looking into how these type of questions can be integrated as well in the standard questionnaires that humanitarian go out and ask communities in distress. In this particular case in Iraq, obviously just the logistics of agreeing on calendars, what everybody pretty much has a full-time job, was quite tricky. But we had a mix of NGOs, international organizations, the UN agencies and internews in this case. And I think that brought a variety and a range of different expertise and understanding. We also had the luxury, I would say, of having a colleague from internews who's worked in Iraq with media for 5 years. And there's nothing that can replace the local knowledge and the local connections. And in that sense, with colleagues from UNHCR working there for quite some time, with UN OCHA looking overall on how the humanitarian response gears up, and different agencies like Internews, NRC or IUN, I thought that was a very fascinating and rich exercise. The question is how we can replicate this next time. Another option that we've been exploring, and I think OCHA is taking a lead on this, is looking into how UNDAC, United Nations Disaster Assessment and Coordination teams, could actually also help us to really get a grasp of what is happening on the information and communication needs in the early days, in the early hours of an emergency. They are, let's say, the A-team, the first people who arrive into an emergency, working with local government officials and line ministries. Obviously, including this particular aspect of information and communication will be extremely relevant. Another key issue will be to actually invest more on having updated media and telecommunication landscape guide from most of these, from some of the most prone to crisis and emergencies countries.
That's where there's that collective responsibility, right? I think we need, when we do coordination meetings or working groups, just everyone understanding just the basic 5 facts as we're heading to a response location affected area, just to know who's doing what in that location, what kind of whether it's the government's land allocation strategy or what's going to happen next. Just going into an area and providing just the basic 3-5 things that communities need to know. And we generally know what that is, right? Communities will ask about food, water, shelter, and other basic needs, and they'll want to know if they have an issue, who do they contact? We should be able to be equipped and coordinated enough that we walk into location with that information